Disclaimer: this story is a work of creative writing inspired by true-to-life situations. While it deals with themes of relationships, temptation, and infidelity, the names, places, and identifying details have been changed to protect privacy. From the outside looking in, my life seemed enviable. People often told me how lucky I was, how perfect my relationship appeared, how stable and peaceful my home seemed. I would smile, nod, and sometimes even agree with them, because in many ways it was true. My partner and I had built a life together that looked exactly like what society expected: steady jobs, a decent apartment, quiet evenings with takeout, and weekends filled with errands or short getaways. To most, that looked like happiness. But perfection, I've learned, often has cracks invisible to those on the outside. Behind closed doors, something had shifted. The laughter that once came so easily now felt forced. Our conversations, once endless and exciting, had dwindled to shallow exchanges about bills, chores, or schedules. My partner and I weren't fighting. We had never been the explosive, dramatic type, but that was part of the problem. There was no fire, no spark, no pulse left in what we had. We had slipped into a routine so predictable that I sometimes felt like I was living the same day over and over again. I told myself it was normal. After years together, who still had butterflies? Stability was supposed to replace passion. Security was supposed to be enough. And for a long time, I believed it was. But every now and then, I'd catch myself longing for something more, a fleeting thought when I saw a couple holding hands in public with a look of genuine excitement in their eyes, or when I'd overhear friends talking about the thrill of new love. I told myself I wasn't jealous, that I was simply remembering what it felt like. Still, the ache remained. My partner didn't notice, or maybe they chose not to. We moved in parallel, side by side, functioning like a well-oiled machine but rarely truly connecting. I became good at hiding the emptiness I felt inside. If I ever dared to bring it up, I was afraid it would sound like ingratitude. After all, I had everything I thought I wanted. It wasn't until new people entered my life, unexpectedly, casually, that I began to realize just how vulnerable I really was. At that time, I couldn't have predicted how much they would disrupt the neat little world I had built, or how much they would awaken something in me I thought had long died out. Looking back now, it's strange to think that the unraveling of my perfect life didn't begin with a fight, a betrayal, or even a conscious choice. It began with something far quieter, an emptiness I could no longer ignore, and the arrival of people who, without even trying, saw through the cracks in my facade. At that point, I still believed I was strong enough to resist. I still thought my loyalty and my promises would keep me safe. But deep down, even then, I felt the faint pull of something dangerous and irresistible. And that was where it all began. It started innocently, as these things often do. At work, 2 new colleagues had recently joined our department. They were friendly, charismatic, and effortlessly charming in ways that immediately set them apart from the rest of us who had grown used to the monotony of office life. They seemed to breathe energy into the room. At first, I didn't pay much attention. I was polite, of course. I introduced myself, made small talk, and went about my day. But over the next few weeks, I noticed something unsettling. They noticed me. Not in the casual way coworkers exchange pleasantries, but in the focused, deliberate way that makes you feel seen. It was subtle at first. A smile held a moment longer than necessary. Questions about my weekend that felt more personal than professional. Compliments that were playful enough to sound harmless, but bold enough to make me wonder if there was something beneath them. I told myself it was nothing. People are friendly, I reasoned. Maybe they were just naturally flirty, the kind of people who carried charm like a second skin. I brushed it off, even joked about it to myself when I got home. But part of me remembered each interaction, replayed each look, each word, as though they had burned themselves into my memory. One afternoon, after a particularly slow day, they approached me with an invitation. It wasn't anything outrageous. They suggested grabbing drinks after work, a casual hangout to unwind from the stress of the week. I hesitated. My partner was expecting me at home, and I knew there was nothing innocent about the way the invitation had been delivered. Still, I didn't want to appear rude. I declined politely, making up an excuse about errands I needed to run. They didn't push, just smiled knowingly, as if my refusal wasn't a real answer but just part of a game. The next day, they tried again. This time, it wasn't drinks but coffee during lunch. Just us, they said, in a tone that felt loaded with meaning. Again, I said no. Again, the smile lingered. Each time I turned them down, I told myself I was doing the right thing. I was protecting my relationship, drawing the line where it needed to be drawn. But something strange was happening inside me. I wasn't relieved after saying no, I was restless. My mind kept circling back to them, wondering why they had chosen me, what they saw in me that made them so persistent. That's when I realized the danger wasn't in their invitations, it was in how much they made me think about them even after I walked away. At home, I acted normal. My partner and I watched television, ate dinner, and went to bed early like we always did. But somewhere deep inside, I carried a flicker of curiosity, a dangerous spark that hadn't been there before. I had said no, but it wasn't the end of the story. In fact, it was only the beginning. The moment came sooner than I expected. One late evening, after most of the office had already cleared out, I was finishing up some paperwork when one of them appeared at my desk. Their smile was disarming, casual on the surface, but there was something in their eyes that carried more weight than words. "Still here?" they asked, leaning lightly against the edge of my desk. I laughed softly, trying to keep things light. "Yeah, just catching up." "You?" "Same," they replied, though I could tell they hadn't stopped by for paperwork. There was a pause, then, we should really stop pretending like we don't enjoy each other's company. "Let me take you out tonight. Just you and me." The words hit harder than I thought they would. Direct, bold, no playful ambiguity this time. For a moment, I froze, unsure of how to respond. My pulse quickened, not just from nerves, but from something else I didn't want to name. I shook my head quickly, forcing a laugh. "I can't. You know I'm in a relationship." They leaned closer, lowering their voice. "I know. But sometimes, the things we can't have are the ones worth trying for." For a split second, the thought crossed my mind, what would it be like to say yes? The idea carried a weight of excitement, a spark of danger. But just as quickly, I pushed it away. "No," I said firmly this time. "I'm not that kind of person." They studied me for a moment, their expression unreadable. Then, with a small smirk, they straightened up and walked away, leaving only the faintest scent of their cologne in the air. I sat there for several minutes, staring blankly at the papers on my desk. My chest felt tight, as if I had narrowly avoided something catastrophic. But instead of relief, what I felt was disappointment. Disappointment in what, exactly? That they had asked? That I had said no? Or that part of me had wanted to say yes? On the drive home, I replayed the encounter in my head. The boldness of their words, the confidence in their tone, it was intoxicating. My partner had never looked at me that way, not anymore. Not with that hunger, that unspoken promise. When I walked through the front door, everything was normal. Dinner was waiting, the TV hummed in the background, and my partner greeted me with a smile. Safe, predictable, familiar. And yet, all I could think about was the fire I had felt in those few stolen minutes at the office. I had said no. I had done the right thing. But deep inside, a truth I didn't want to admit had already taken root. Their boldness had fascinated me. And even though I had turned away, I wasn't sure I wanted it to stop. It was the first no, but I already knew it wouldn't be the last test I'd face. After that first direct refusal, I thought things would cool down. I assumed they would get bored, move on to someone else, or at the very least, stop testing my limits. But I was wrong. If anything, the refusal seemed to spark something in them, a challenge, perhaps. And slowly, carefully, they began to blur the line between harmless and forbidden. It started small. Little notes left on my desk with jokes only I would understand. A shared glance across the room during long, dull meetings. Casual touches, an arm brushing against mine as we walked side by side, a hand on my shoulder that lingered a moment too long. None of it was overt enough to call out, but each time, I felt the charge of electricity beneath my skin. I told myself these were insignificant gestures, not worth worrying about. But deep down, I knew I was paying attention. I noticed every detail, every move, every subtle signal they sent my way. Worse, I had stopped avoiding them. Part of me was curious. Part of me wanted to see how far they would go. One afternoon, we ended up staying late again, both working overtime on a project. At some point, the office grew quiet and we found ourselves alone in the break room. Conversation drifted from work to personal stories, and then, almost without realizing it, to the subject of relationships. "You ever feel like you're just stuck?" they asked, sipping from their coffee cup, eyes fixed on me. "Like you've built a life that looks fine on the outside but feels empty inside?" My breath caught. How could they possibly know? I gave a careful answer, something non-committal, but inside I felt exposed. It was as if they could see straight through me, into the hollow spaces I'd been trying so hard to ignore. Before I knew it, I was talking more than I should have about the routine at home, about how my partner and I barely touched anymore, about how I sometimes felt invisible. They listened intently, nodding, not judging. Their silence was understanding, and that understanding felt dangerously intoxicating. When I realized how much I had shared, guilt hit me like a wave. This wasn't just conversation anymore, it was a betrayal, even if no lines had been physically crossed. Emotional intimacy, the kind I was now giving them, was something I should have reserved for my partner. But when I looked at them, the way their eyes softened, the way their smile felt like it was meant only for me, I couldn't deny how alive it made me feel. That night, as I lay next to my partner in bed, I stared at the ceiling, replaying every word, every glance, every fleeting touch. Nothing had happened, not yet, but the line had already been crossed. Not in action, but in intent. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to go back. Once a line is crossed, even if it's invisible, it's almost impossible to go back. I told myself that nothing inappropriate had happened, that sharing a few private thoughts or lingering in a conversation wasn't the same as betrayal. But deep down, I knew the truth. The fascination had already taken root, and it was growing stronger every day. I began noticing how much I looked forward to seeing them. I paid attention to what I wore in the mornings, choosing outfits I thought might catch their eye. I lingered around common areas at work, pretending to need something while secretly hoping to run into them. Every casual smile they sent my way felt like a secret message, and every time they leaned in close to whisper a joke, I felt my pulse quicken. It wasn't just about physical attraction. It was the way they made me feel seen, as if I wasn't just a background character in my own life. They asked questions no one else did. They remembered little details I'd mentioned days earlier. They noticed when I was tired, or when something was weighing on me, and they had a way of drawing it out without me even realizing. At home, the contrast was undeniable. My partner and I still went through the motions, cooking dinner, folding laundry, making plans for the weekend, but it all felt mechanical, routine. When they asked about my day, I gave short answers, leaving out the parts that mattered most. I couldn't tell them about the person who had slowly begun occupying more and more space in my thoughts. The guilt was sharp but fleeting, always drowned out by the excitement I felt whenever I saw that name flash across my phone screen. Late-night messages became our habit, nothing explicit, just playful banter that felt like it belonged to a different version of me. With them, I wasn't the responsible partner or the dependable worker. I was someone freer, bolder, more alive. I told myself it was harmless. Just talking. Just laughing. Just curiosity. But each just was another step deeper into the pull I swore I'd resist. Then came the small, deliberate acts of secrecy. Deleting messages before my partner could see them. Staying late at work even when I didn't need to, just to have a few more minutes with them. Making excuses for why I seemed distracted at home. I hated lying, but at the same time, the lies gave me space to nurture the fascination that was quickly becoming an addiction. It wasn't about whether I wanted them anymore, it was about how much I needed the feeling they gave me. The spark. The validation. The thrill of walking a tightrope between loyalty and desire. And though I hadn't yet said yes, I knew it was only a matter of time before my no would break. It happened on a night that seemed ordinary at first, the kind of night you never expect will change everything. I had stayed late at work again, using an unfinished report as an excuse, though we both knew it wasn't the paperwork that was keeping me there. They were. The office was nearly empty, the hum of fluorescent lights filling the silence. I was at my desk when they appeared, leaning casually against the doorway. "You always work too hard," they teased, but their eyes told a different story. I smiled, trying to keep it light. Or maybe I just don't have anywhere better to be. The words slipped out before I could stop them, and the look they gave me in that moment made my chest tighten. It was bold, unguarded, and I couldn't take it back. "Then come with me," they said softly. "Just tonight. No work. No rules. Just us." For a long second, I didn't answer. My head screamed no, but my body betrayed me. My pulse raced, my palms felt clammy, and the thought of walking out that door with them filled me with both terror and exhilaration. "I can't," I whispered, though my voice lacked conviction. They stepped closer, lowering their tone until it was almost a plea. "You can. You're just afraid. Afraid of what you'll feel. Afraid it might remind you you're still alive." The room seemed to shrink around us. Every ounce of logic I had clung to crumbled beneath the weight of that moment. For months, I had been fighting this pull, telling myself I was stronger than temptation. But the truth was, I had been waiting for an excuse to stop fighting. And that night, I found it. We didn't go anywhere extravagant, just a quiet bar a few blocks away. We talked, laughed, leaned closer with every drink, until the space between us disappeared completely. The first kiss wasn't planned, but when it happened, it felt inevitable. Like gravity had finally won. It was reckless. It was wrong. And yet, it was intoxicating. My entire body lit up with a fire I hadn't felt in years. Every nerve ending screamed awake, every touch a reminder of something I thought I had lost forever. By the time I made it home that night, guilt crashed over me in waves. My partner was asleep on the couch, a half-empty glass of wine on the table beside them. I stood there in the doorway, watching them breathe, feeling the weight of what I had just done settle into my chest. I wanted to believe it was a one-time mistake, that I could lock it away and never let it happen again. But even as I kissed my partner's forehead and whispered a quiet goodnight, I knew the truth. I had given in. And once that door had been opened, there was no way to close it again. The morning after was the hardest. I woke up with my partner beside me, the same familiar routine unfolding as if nothing had changed, coffee brewing in the kitchen, the sound of the shower running, the quiet comfort of a life we had built together. On the surface, it was all the same. But inside, I felt different. Broken. Every glance at my partner's face twisted my stomach with guilt. They didn't know, of course. They had no reason to suspect anything. But I did, and that knowledge burned like acid in my chest. I told myself I would stop, that what happened was a mistake born from weakness. Yet, even as I repeated that lie, a part of me was already craving the next encounter. And it didn't take long. Messages came in, subtle at first, just a simple, "had fun last night," or "can't stop thinking about you." Each one made my pulse quicken, not with fear, but with anticipation. The guilt was there, yes, but it was overshadowed by the thrill, the forbidden, the secret, the intoxicating knowledge that I was living two lives at once. At work, it grew harder to pretend. Every time our eyes met across the room, I felt a spark that I couldn't extinguish. We started sneaking away during lunch breaks, lingering in corners where no one else would see. The secrecy became part of the allure, and with each stolen moment, the line between who I was and who I was becoming blurred. At home, cracks began to show. My partner noticed my distractions, the way I checked my phone too often, the sudden excuses to stay late at work. They asked questions, casual but laced with suspicion. I answered with rehearsed ease, but inside, paranoia gnawed at me. Sleep became restless. My mind was a battlefield between desire and guilt, pleasure and shame. Sometimes, in the quiet of night, I'd stare at my partner and wonder if they already knew, if they were just waiting for me to confess. Other times, I convinced myself I could keep both worlds alive, balancing loyalty with betrayal, pretending that I could live in the middle without choosing. But the truth was inescapable. I was losing myself. The person I thought I was, the faithful partner, the dependable one, was slipping away, replaced by someone I barely recognized. The outsiders, meanwhile, weren't content with secrecy forever. They wanted more. They pushed for time outside of work, for weekends, for deeper involvement. Each request tightened the noose around me, making it harder to juggle the lies. And yet, the more dangerous it became, the more alive I felt. It was a paradox I couldn't escape. The guilt tore me apart, but the thrill stitched me back together. I knew something had to give. Sooner or later, the walls I had built would collapse. And when they did, someone would get hurt, my partner, them, or maybe me. But at that point, I wasn't sure I cared anymore. The breaking point came on a night that felt unbearably ordinary. My partner and I were sitting at the dinner table, the TV murmuring in the background, plates between us filled with food that neither of us really tasted. It should have been just another quiet evening, but instead, the weight of my double life pressed down harder than ever before. I couldn't look at them without feeling the sting of betrayal. Every smile they gave me felt like a knife, because I knew I wasn't the person they believed I was. I wasn't loyal. I wasn't faithful. I was living a lie, and I was running out of places to hide it. The messages on my phone had become constant, harder to conceal. The excuses were wearing thin. And more than anything, my conscience was fraying under the weight of it all. I couldn't keep both worlds alive. Not forever. That night, as my partner reached across the table to refill my glass, I almost blurted it out. The confession sat heavy on my tongue, begging to be released. I've been unfaithful. I let myself be drawn in. I said no at first, but what they did to me fascinated me. But the words never came. Instead, I smiled weakly, thanked them, and swallowed the truth along with the wine. Because deep down, I wasn't ready to let go, not of the thrill, not of the danger, not of the part of me that felt alive for the first time in years. And so, I kept it inside. Days turned into weeks, each one a careful balancing act between lies and longing. Sometimes, late at night, I'd wonder if confessing would be a kind of freedom, a release from the constant fear of being discovered. Other times, I convinced myself that silence was safer, that no good could come from shattering the fragile world we had built. But the truth is, I don't know how the story ends. Maybe one day, the guilt will drown out the fascination and force me to come clean. Maybe I'll be caught, the truth ripping through my life whether I'm ready or not. Or maybe, just maybe, I'll keep walking this dangerous line, addicted to both the love I promised and the thrill I couldn't resist. What I do know is this: the first no didn't save me. It only delayed the inevitable. Because when temptation whispers often enough, when it offers you pieces of yourself you thought were lost forever, saying no once doesn't mean you'll say no forever. And sometimes, the things you fear most, the things you swear you'll resist, become the very things that fascinate you the most. 8.